Today we're going to continue our study of Social Studies Chapter 4 with Lesson 3. Last time we talked about the Old Kingdom. Today we're going to talk about the Middle and the New Kingdoms. So during the Middle and New Kingdoms, order and greatness were restored in Egypt. The Middle Kingdom was a period of stable government between periods of disorder. In the New Kingdom, Egyptian trade and military power reached their peak. But Egypt's greatness did not last, and work and daily life were different for each of Egypt's social classes. So, at the end of the Old Kingdom, there was a competition for power between the nobility and the pharaohs. Remember the rich elite people and the pharaohs. This marks the beginning of the Middle Kingdom and the ending of the Old Kingdom. So Egypt fell into disorder around 1750 BC/BCE. A group called Hyksos invaded Egypt, and they ruled the region for 200 years. Eventually, the Egyptians fought back. Ahmose of Thebes declared himself king, and he drove the Hyksos out of Egypt. This marks the beginning of the New Kingdom. So we had the Old Kingdom. What started the Middle Kingdom was you had competition for power between the nobles and the pharaohs. And then a group of people came in when they saw all this chaos. They took over and ruled for about 200 years. And then the Egyptians got tired of it. They fought back. And when Ahmose of Thebes drove the Hyksos out of Egypt, this marked the beginning of the New Kingdom. So they were kind of leery in the New Kingdom. They feared future invasions. So the Egyptians took control of all possible invasion routes into the kingdom. So in other words, instead of them being the victim, they went out and did the conquering. So Egypt took over vast lands, and they were the leading military power in that area. Egypt, of course, became rich because of the lands that they conquered. The conquest brought traders into contact with distant lands, and trade routes, which are simply paths followed by traders, developed. We had a lady, Queen Hatshepsut. She encouraged trade and used the profits to support the arts and architecture. And then Ramses the Great. You'll hear more about him when we talk about the Israelites. But led by Ramses the Great, Egypt fought invaders for many, many years. And this basically just left their empire diminished. Like it just dwindled down to nothing. You're going to come back and watch this video after I've taught the lesson. Then there is a funny video for you to come back and watch. Here's another funny video. So these red lines show the trade routes in Egypt around 1400 BC. And you can see they traveled quite a distance, all into Asia Minor and over to Greece and into Arabia and down into Kush. And you can see some of the things that they traded for that each region would have had that they didn't have. Gold, copper, timber. So these little trees show oasis. It's an oasis, and it would be out in the middle of the desert. So it'd be a place to find water out in the middle of the desert. A lush place. Here's a depiction of Queen Hatshepsut. She ruled from 1472 to around 1458 BC. She was married to the pharaoh Thutmose II, who was actually her half-brother. I know, ew. Anyway, he died young. He left the throne to Thutmose III, his son, by another woman. But since Thutmose III was still very young, Hatshepsut took over power. Many people in ancient Egypt and the New Kingdom didn't think that women should rule. But Hatshepsut dressed as a man and called herself king. And then after she died, her stepson took back power, and then he destroyed all of the monuments that Hatshepsut had built during her rule. The complex society required people to take on many different kinds of jobs. So our social structure or social hierarchy comes into play. Family life was very important in Egyptian society, and most Egyptians lived in their own homes. Ladies, you had some legal rights, including you could own property, you could make contracts, like legal documents, such as they could divorce their husbands. So some jobs, we already know about scribes. They were very respected. Very few people in the Egyptian society were more respected than scribes. They did not have to pay taxes, and therefore many of them became very wealthy. We had the artisans, the artists, and the architects. These jobs, just like today, required advanced skills, and they were also very admired in Egypt. Although trade was important, you had very few traders. So very few people held these positions. Some of them had to travel very long distances to buy and sell goods. So your merchants and your traders, yes, it was important, but it was rather dangerous at that day and time. Soldiers, of course, Egypt created a permanent army that offered soldiers a chance to rise in social status, and they could receive land as payment. Farmers and other peasants. We talked about them before. They're the ones that started this whole civilization idea, but they made up the majority of your population. They grew the crops to support their families, and then they are the ones that had the main tax obligation to pay. I know, it's not fair. And then slaves in ancient Egypt, they were usually criminals or prisoners. However, some of the slaves had some legal rights, just not a lot. So this ends lesson 4.3. Next time, we will talk about Egyptian achievements with lesson 4.